Let's take a look at how to build a select and build system like you could use on a design application or an RTS. Alright, so to start us off, over on the left-hand side, my main scene here just consists of a 2D node, which is just my world. Obviously, if you're doing maybe a graphical interface for some kind of design program, you could just use a control. And then I have a canvas layer, which is its own separate scene that we'll get into, which is holding all of my UI elements, of course. And then I just have a color rect in there that I named grass, just to give us a bit of a green background, something that's not boring and, well, really just not that gray back there. Alright, and down in our file system, you can see I just brought in a bunch of icons from some asset pack that I had for a long time ago. Alright, so let's go ahead and dive in. Starting off, we can start with the GUI here, or the graphical user interface. Now, I just have a color rect, which is my faint black rectangle here, to act as like my tray, so that the user would know what's going on there. We have a scroll container inside of that. That way, if you want to have items that are much larger than this, you can certainly do that, and you'll end up with this scrolling cell. So if you see, if I come down here and I just duplicate this a few times, you can see if we have a lot of items, the user is then able to scroll back and forth to get to all of our items. Just undo those. Alright. Inside of there, I have my HBox container, which is what's holding the actual items that we'll be able to scroll through. Now my HBox container has a separation of 30, purely for the visual. You can change that and set it up however you want, of course, based off of your own objects. My grow direction is just end and end. Nothing special going on there. Now for my items in here, all of my items here, I should just set this as its own scene, but I already set the textures, so I didn't, but you can certainly do that. All of these have a script on them, but they are all sharing the same script. So if I go inside of that, you can see we have a custom signal called object select, and if I didn't mention previously, this is a texture button. Just to save a little space, I'm using an onReady variable here just to get my GUI, my canvas layer up there. Through all these get parents, just so we can pass the signal in a little cleaner without typing that out. Now in our ready function, all I'm doing is I'm connecting two signals. I'm connecting the pressed signal to myself, and that'll be the emit object function that I'm going to call. And the other connect is going to be our custom signal object select, which I'm connecting up to our GUI, and that's going to call the function tray item selected. Now for our emit object function down here, all I'm going to do there is I'm going to emit my object select signal, and I'm going to pass in two variables with it, two arguments, and that is going to be my item's name and the texture. Now, because this is a texture button, you got normal, hovered, pressed. You got a bunch of different textures in there. I'm just using normal, just using the normal texture. But if you have multiple different textures in there, it's worth noting that you're probably going to want the normal texture. Alright, so now we can head on up to our GUI, where we've connected our tray item selected function and our object select signal. Alright, so if we come into here, we have two onReadies. One of them is going to be my ghost item, and one is going to be the object tray, which goes all the way down to my HBox container. And then we'll have an object for a selected object, which will just be a string. If I didn't mention it, my ghost item That's on my GUI there at the end. That's outside of everything else. And that's just a texture rect that I have set to expand, keep aspect. My size is set to 50/50, and I could set the minimum to that as well. If I want it to be extra safe, that it doesn't get small or disappear or anything. Filter is set to ignore because we don't want it to block our mouse at all when it comes to actually placing, and my modulate is around the middle. Mine's a little under halfway, set at 104. Alright, so we have our tray item selected. And remember, this is coming from our buttons when we click on an item. This is our custom signal. So we're passing in the item and a texture. And remember, item is going to be a string. It's the name of our item, the name of the one that we clicked on. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our ghost item. We're going to set placing to false. And then if our ghost item placing is set to false, now we're just setting this to false just to fix a weird bug that seemed to pop up when it was stuck on true. So we're setting it to false by default whenever we click. But you can try without that. But when it's false, all we're going to do, we're going to change selected object to be our new item. Right? Whatever item we clicked and passed in here. And we're going to set the ghost item's texture to whatever the texture is that we passed in. So when we click on an item, we're sending that texture with the signal. And that's going to be brought into our function here. And we're going to use that texture to apply to our ghost item, which is that semi-transparent item that's kind of following our mouse around. And then I'm just going to set the placing property of my ghost item to true. And if we hop over to that script real quick, you can see all we're doing is just have a variable called placing set to false by default. And if it's true, we're going to set visible to true so it can be seen. And we're just going to set its position to my mouse position. And if it's false, meaning if placing is false, then visible is going to be false. So that's all our ghost item is doing. And that leaves us with two more functions here on our GUI. One of them is going to be our input here, which underscore input is built in to the language. And I'm just going to check if the event is action released, and left click, I create it up in the project settings in the input mapper. So if I'm left clicking and placing is set to true, so if both of those things are true, then what we're going to do, we're going to set placing to false. And I'm going to call my function called place item, and I'm going to pass in the texture for my ghost item and the position for my ghost item. And now place item, we get a texture and a position passed into it. I'm creating a new object here, which I'm just loading a demo scene in this case. Now, depending on what you have selected, if you're going to do like an RTS, then you're probably going to have completely different scenes with completely different things that you want to load. And they probably have their own scripts and all that on there. So you might want to do an if or match statement here and just match the name of the selected object. That way you load the right scene. So you can, if that's what you want to do, that might be the way you want to go about doing that. But for this, again, I'm just using one scene that has it as a demo. So I'm just calling load and putting in my demo building scene. And then I'm going to create an instance of that object. I'm going to get my parent because I want to add it into the world, not to my UI. So we're going to get the parent and we're going to add our instance object into the world. And then all we're going to do is we're going to set our instance object's texture to the texture that was passed in, and our instance object position, which since mine is a texture rect, it's just a rect position. If you're working with 2D, it's just position. And we're going to set this equal to pos, which is the position we passed in to our function. Of course, this is my demo building. Again, it's just a texture rect. It has no no texture to it because that'll be assigned inside the function. I do have the size set to 50/50 so that it doesn't shrink or disappear, which it was doing, which is why I have the minimum set here. And if this was an RTS, of course, you'd add a script onto it to keep track of. It's adding this resource every time this timer hits 0. Or it's removing resources when this timer hits 0, or it's spawning, I don't know, a new troop, a new archer every 30 seconds, or, whatever it is you want to do. If you want to go the RTS route, that's going to be whatever. That's going to be heavily dependent on what goes, if you add a script and what goes on in there. Alright, so that's all we have set up. And that allows us to, you can see our GUI here. Come back over here to our proper scene. And we click on it. So remember, these are texture buttons. We got the press signal. That's setting our ghost item to sending out or emitting a signal that's setting our ghost item to true. We've passed in the texture of the button that we clicked on. And on our ghost item, it says if positioning or placing, I believe I called it, is set to true, it's going to follow the mouse. And remember, our GUI says if placing is true, which it clearly is because it's following our mouse, and we left click, it's going to place our demo scene there based off of the texture, or give it the texture of the ghost item that was following our mouse. And it's been placed into the world. And since we've added it to the world and not our GUI, if we have a camera here to move around again, as if it was an RTS, the object is going to stay there. It's not going to be stuck to our screen. And I do want to make one note here that if you do want to set it so that you don't have to keep coming down here, if you want to keep placing the same item like so, what you can do is, inside of our GUI, I believe it is, instead of setting this to false, if we just remove that feature there, you can see we can go ahead and just keep on placing single object. Just note, you might want to have a maybe set it so that if it's placing and the user right clicks, then you set it to false. So if you wanted to do something like that, if you wanted to allow the user to place multiple times. Alright, so there you go. There's the example of how we can create a select and build system, or a select and place system that you can use for maybe a design software, or an RTS, like we've talked about in here a little bit. Or maybe even something like a map creator. Of course, that's going to go into a little more details, more advanced when we get to there, but at the core, there you go, we have a select and build, or select and place system.